I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, staring at the refrigerator, and I made a decision that changed everything. Let me back up. My name is June. I'm 31 years old. I work as a dental hygienist. I drive a sensible car. I keep a tidy house, and I have never in my life been described as someone who makes scenes. My mother raised me to be polite. My grandmother raised me to be gracious. My whole life, I have been the person who smiles through things, who takes a breath, who says it's fine, even when it isn't. So what I did that night, what I actually did, still surprises me sometimes when I think about it. I met my husband, Will, when I was 26. He was introduced to me by a coworker at a holiday party, and I remember thinking he was the kind of man my grandmother would have approved of, steady, thoughtful. He held doors open. He called his mother every Sunday. That last part should have been a sign. Not because calling your mother is bad. It isn't. But the way Will did it, the way his whole face changed when she called, the way his voice got smaller and more careful, that was the thing I didn't understand yet. His mother's name is Roberta. Everyone calls her Bobby, and she insists on it. The first time I met her, she hugged me for just a fraction too long and then held me at arm's length and said, "You're smaller than I pictured." Not thin, not petite. Smaller. Like I was a version of something she'd ordered and found slightly disappointing. I smiled. I said it was so nice to meet her. Will and I dated for 2 years, got engaged, and were married on a Saturday in October with about 60 people in attendance. Bobby cried during the ceremony. She cried beautifully. I'll give her that, the kind of crying that looks good in photos. Afterward, she told me the venue wasn't what she would have chosen, but that it had a certain charm. We bought a house the following spring. A 3-bedroom in a neighborhood we both loved, close to my job, 40 minutes from Will's office. It was the right size for us and, someday, for a family. We put a lot of ourselves into that house. I planted a garden in the backyard. Will built shelves in the garage. We bought furniture slowly, carefully, making sure each piece felt like ours. Bobby visited the first time about 3 weeks after we moved in. She walked through every room with her hands clasped behind her back, nodding. She said the kitchen was a good size. She said the master bedroom got good light. She said the guest room was going to be important to keep nice because she had a feeling she'd be using it often. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Over the next 2 years, Bobby visited 11 times. I counted. Some visits were planned weeks in advance. Some were last-minute phone calls on a Thursday. "I'm thinking of coming up this weekend, just to see you two." She never asked. She announced, and Will, every single time, said some version of, "Course, Mom, come on up." I tried, early on, to talk to him about it. "I just think it would be nice if she gave us a little more notice," I said once, carefully, after a visit where Bobby had arrived on a Friday and stayed until Monday, reorganizing our pantry because she felt the cans weren't in the right order. Will looked at me with this expression he gets, somewhere between confused and a little wounded. "She's just trying to help," he said. She reorganized our pantry. Because she wanted to help. That was Will's answer for everything. She's just trying to help. She means well. She loves us. And look, I believed him. I believed she loved us, in whatever way Bobby was capable of loving things. But love isn't the same as respect. And Bobby had a very particular way of showing love that involved a lot of opinions, a lot of decisions made on other people's behalf, and a very flexible understanding of what required permission. The summer before everything happened, Will's sister got married in Phoenix. Big wedding, great time. I genuinely liked his sister's new husband. But at the reception, Bobby pulled me aside near the dessert table and mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she'd been thinking about Christmas. "I want to do it at your place this year," she said. She wasn't asking. "Oh," I said, "we usually go to my parents' on Christmas Eve, and—" "I've already talked to Will about it. He thinks it's a great idea." She smiled and patted my arm. "It'll be so nice to have everyone together." Everyone. I found out later that everyone meant Bobby, Will's uncle and aunt, their 3 adult kids, 2 of those kids' spouses, 4 grandchildren ranging in age from 2 to 9, Will's cousin who was going through a divorce, that cousin's college-age daughter, and 2 neighbors of Bobby's who were spending the holiday alone and whom she had apparently decided to absorb into our Christmas without mentioning it to anyone. 17 people in our house for Christmas. I talked to Will that night in our hotel room. 17 people, I said, give or take, in our house. It's a good-sized house. Will, I sat down on the edge of the bed. You agreed to this without talking to me. He did the face, the confused, wounded face. I thought you'd be excited. You're always saying you want to do more with family. My family. My parents. My brother. I'm talking about my parents not being there on Christmas because your mother decided to book our house like it's an Airbnb. He said we'd figure it out. He said my parents could come too. He said it wasn't a big deal. It's not a big deal, June. I heard that phrase so many times in our marriage that I started to wonder if I was the problem. Maybe I was too rigid. Maybe I was too territorial. My therapist. Yes, I had a therapist. And yes, this is one of the reasons why. Helped me understand the difference between being flexible and being erased. But understanding something in a therapy session and feeling it in your own home are 2 different things. I spent the next 3 months preparing for Christmas, because that's what I do. I planned the menu. I mapped out the sleeping arrangements. I borrowed 2 folding tables from my parents and bought extra sets of sheets for the guest room. I made lists. I coordinated dietary restrictions. Will's cousin's daughter was vegan. One of Bobby's neighbors had a gluten intolerance. 2 of the kids had a nut allergy. I managed all of it. My parents came Christmas Eve afternoon. We had dinner, just the 4 of us plus Will, and it was the nicest part of the whole holiday. My mom helped me set up the kitchen. My dad sat with Will and watched football. We stayed up too late and laughed too much. And I remember thinking, this is what Christmas is supposed to feel like. Then everyone else arrived on Christmas morning. I want to be fair. I want to say it wasn't all bad. Some of Will's family I genuinely like. His Uncle Ted is hilarious, and his aunt makes the best cornbread I've ever had in my life. The little kids were sweet, even when they were loud. But Bobby walked in at 9:30 in the morning, before the first round of guests had even taken off their coats, and went directly to my kitchen, looked at what I was preparing, and said, in front of everyone, "Oh, you're not doing a standing rib roast?" I assumed you were doing a standing rib roast. I was doing a honey-glazed ham and a beef tenderloin. I had spent $430 on food. I had been marinating the tenderloin since the night before. "Ham and tenderloin," I said. She made a sound, a small sound, but one that communicated a great deal. I went back to cooking. By 2 in the afternoon, Bobby had rearranged the furniture in my living room for better flow, suggested that the kids could sleep on my bedroom floor while Will and I took the pull-out couch, redirected my mother when she tried to help in the kitchen by saying, "I think we have enough hands in here," and told one of Will's cousins, within my earshot, that she wished Will had married someone who wasn't quite so serious all the time. I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists for a minute. Then I dried my hands and went back out. The dinner itself was fine. Food turned out well. My mom made her pie, which everyone raved about. The kids were asleep by 8. By 9:30, I was doing dishes and pretending I wasn't exhausted and furious in equal measure. That was Christmas. By mid-February, things had settled. Not resolved, they never really resolved, but settled. Bobby's visits had slowed down slightly. Will and I weren't arguing as much. I was trying, genuinely trying, to build something that felt like peace. And then Will came home from work on a Tuesday with the look on his face I knew. "So," he said, "I was thinking about the 4th of July. I set down the dish I was drying. What about it? Mom mentioned she'd love to do something at our place. We've got the backyard, the grill. It could be really fun." I waited. "She's thinking," he paused. "She's thinking of inviting some people." "How many people, Will?" "Maybe around 20. I don't know exactly what happened in my face, but something did, because he immediately said, June, it's just a cookout. 20 people. It's not a sit-down dinner. It's a cookout. People bring stuff. It's casual. I took a breath. I thought about what my therapist had said about voicing needs clearly. Will, I need you to understand something. This is our home. I need to be part of the decision before it's made, not after. I haven't decided anything. She's already told people, hasn't she? A pause, a very telling pause. She may have mentioned it to a few people. I walked out of the kitchen. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark for about 10 minutes. Then I came back down. Okay, I said, here's what I need. I need a list of who's coming. I need it 2 weeks out, and I need us to agree right now that this does not become what Christmas was. Will agreed. He agreed readily, which should have been comforting. It wasn't. The weeks leading up to the 4th were fine on the surface. I bought supplies. I planned what we'd grill. I set up the backyard. I bought extra chairs. I did not complain. I handled it the way I always handled things, efficiently, quietly, without making it a bigger issue than it had to be. The list Bobby gave Will was 22 people, not 20. 22, including 2 people she'd added after our conversation. My parents weren't on the list. I asked Will about it. He said there wasn't really room. I asked him to explain how there was room for Bobby's neighbor's adult son who nobody had met, but not room for my mother and father. He got the face. He said he thought it might feel crowded. I did not say what I wanted to say. I called my mom instead and told her we were doing something small with Will's family. She said that was fine. She said she understood. She didn't deserve to understand. That's the thing. She hadn't done anything wrong. The 4th arrived on a Thursday that year. I'd been prepping since Tuesday: marinated chicken, homemade potato salad, a fruit salad, 2 kinds of burgers, corn, watermelon. The fridge was packed. I'd gotten up early that morning to start some of the prep work, and by 9 a.m., I was already tired but feeling okay, like I could do this. And then Bobby called Will at 9:15. I only heard his side of the conversation. He walked to the other room, but I could still hear the low murmur of his voice, the affirmative sounds, the occasional yeah and of course. When he came back to the kitchen, he had the face. What? I said. So Mom was thinking, since it's a holiday and everyone's coming anyway, she invited a few more people. I put down the knife I was holding. How many more? Like 6 more, so now it's closer to 28. 28 people in my backyard in 6 hours. She already called them? They're already planning on coming? I stood there for a moment. I heard myself breathing. I heard the refrigerator hum. I heard very clearly every single time I had smiled and said it's fine and taken a breath and handled it. Christmas, the reorganized pantry, the not quite so serious. The furniture rearranged for better flow. My parents' name left off a list. Okay, I said. Will relaxed slightly. Yeah? Yeah. I need to run to the store. Will you watch the chicken? Of course. He actually looked relieved. I went upstairs and I sat on the bed again. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I thought about what I actually wanted, not what was polite, not what was manageable, what I actually wanted. I came back downstairs and I started removing things from the refrigerator. Methodically, carefully, the chicken went into a large insulated bag, the potato salad, the fruit salad, the burgers wrapped in butcher paper, the corn, the watermelon I cut into slices and stored in a covered container. I went through the pantry and took the buns, the condiments I'd specifically bought for today, the chips and dip I'd put aside. Will came into the kitchen about 5 minutes in. He stared. What are you doing? Loading the car. June, what are you doing? I straightened up and looked at him directly. I'm taking the food to my parents' house. We're going to spend the 4th with my parents, because my parents were not invited to a party at their daughter's home. He stared at me. Mom's guests are going to be here in 6 hours. I know. There's no food. She invited them, I said. She can feed them. I want to tell you that he immediately understood, that he stood in our kitchen and finally saw with clear eyes what had been happening for 3 years, that he took my hands and said, "You're right, I'm sorry. Let me call my mother, right now." I want to tell you that because it would be a better story. What actually happened was that he stared at me for a long moment, and then he said, quietly, "This is really extreme, June." "Yes," I said, "it is." I picked up my keys. "June, you have a choice," I said. "You can come with me, or you can stay here and explain to 28 people why there's no food. But I am going to my parents' house." I walked out the front door. I sat in the car and I waited because I needed to know which way this was going to go. I needed to know who my husband actually was. He came out 3 minutes later carrying his sunglasses and his wallet. He got in the passenger seat without saying anything. I backed out of the driveway. We drove in silence for a while. I didn't have the radio on. I didn't try to fill the quiet. After about 15 minutes, he said, "She's going to call." "I know. She's going to be very upset." "I know, Will." Another few miles. "You didn't invite my parents," I said. "Not to Christmas, not to today. I have been cooking for your family, hosting your family, accommodating your family for 3 years. And my parents sit at home on holidays because there isn't room. My mother said she understood. She shouldn't have to understand." He was quiet for a long time. I didn't think about it that way. "I know you didn't." "That was wrong of me." "Yes." Bobby called at 11:47. I know because I watched Will's phone light up on the dashboard. He looked at me. I didn't say anything. He let it ring. She called again at 12:03 and at 12:21. At 12:40, she apparently called Will's cousin, who texted him because Will's phone buzzed 3 times in a row. We were sitting in my parents' backyard by then. My mom had made lemonade. My dad had gotten the little charcoal grill going. The 4 of us sat around the patio table with paper plates and food I'd brought, and the afternoon was calm and easy and exactly what a holiday is supposed to be. My dad asked Will if he wanted to try his hand at the grill. Will said yes. I watched my husband stand next to my father and flip chicken while my mom told a story about a neighbor's dog, and something in my chest settled that hadn't been settled in a long time. Will called his mother back that evening from the driveway of my parents' house. I sat on the porch steps and listened to the crickets and didn't listen to the conversation. It lasted about 22 minutes. When he came back, he sat down next to me on the steps. "She's angry," he said. "I know. She said this was humiliating. 28 people showed up to our house and there was nothing to eat, Will, because she invited them without asking either of us." He was quiet. "She said you embarrassed the family." "I set a boundary," I said, "and I kept it." He was quiet for a while. The crickets were loud. Somewhere down the street, someone was setting off small fireworks, little pops of light in the darkening sky. "I need to be better," he said. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a big speech. He said it the way you say something when you're saying it to yourself as much as to someone else, like he was remitting something. "Yes," I said, "you do." We sat there together on the steps for a while, not fixing everything. I want to be honest about that, because it wasn't fixed in a night. There were more conversations, hard ones. A few of them involved raised voices. Will started seeing his own therapist about 3 months later, which was his own decision and one I respected enormously. Things with Bobby did not become simple. They have not become simple. She called it a betrayal. She told Will's aunt that I had ruined the holiday. 2 of his cousins sent him messages. I'm sure they thought were supportive. But something did change that day. Not everything and not at once, but something. The following Thanksgiving, Will called his mother in October. He told her we were hosting a small dinner, both sides of the family, 30 people maximum, planned together by both of us. He told her the guest list would be finalized by us. He told her she was welcome to bring a dish. She pushed back. He held the line. I stood in the kitchen and listened and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time in my own marriage, like we were on the same side. Bobby came to Thanksgiving. She brought her green bean casserole. She did not rearrange the furniture. She said my kitchen was efficient, which was probably the nicest thing she'd ever said about my house. My parents sat at the big table and my dad carved the turkey, and my mom's pie was, again, the best thing anyone ate. I still think about that night in July when I stood in my kitchen and made a choice. Not the dramatic choice, not the one that made Will's cousin text 3 times or made Bobby call it a betrayal. The quieter choice. The one I made before I picked up the insulated bag, when I stopped asking myself what was polite, what was manageable, what would keep the peace, and started asking what I actually needed. That question changed everything, not because the answer was dramatic, because for the first time in 3 years, I let myself have one. There's a version of that 4th of July where I stayed, where I smiled, pulled out the chicken, fired up the grill, and fed 28 people who had no idea they were eating food paid for by someone who hadn't been asked. I know that version well. I'd been living it for 3 years. What I've come to understand, not from a book, not from anyone telling me, is that the things we repeatedly allow become the things people expect. Bobby didn't wake up one morning and decide to take over our lives. It happened slowly, one Sunday visit at a time, one reorganized pantry at a time, one guest list I didn't write at a time. And every time I absorbed it quietly, I was teaching everyone, including myself, that this was acceptable, that I would hold. That's not someone else's fault, that's mine. And sitting with that honestly, without making myself a villain or a victim, was one of the harder things I've done. What changed that morning wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't out of my mind with rage when I packed those bags. I was clear-headed in a way I hadn't been in a long time. Something had finally aligned between what I knew to be true and what I was willing to act on. That alignment, knowing something deeply enough to actually move on it, is something I think people underestimate. It takes more than intelligence. It takes the willingness to be inconvenient, to let something be uncomfortable instead of smoothing it over one more time. Will had the intelligence to see what was happening long before that day. He's not a stupid man, but knowing something and acting on it are 2 entirely different muscles, and his had atrophied from years of choosing the easier response. What I didn't fully understand until much later was that my silence had made it easier for him to stay comfortable. The moment I stopped absorbing it, he had to decide who he actually was. He got in the car. That still means something to me. My parents didn't do anything remarkable that afternoon. My dad grilled chicken. My mom made lemonade. We sat in their backyard and the conversation was easy and there was nothing to manage. But that simplicity, that's what I had been protecting without even naming it. The right to have a holiday that felt like rest instead of performance. I think about Bobby sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of clarity. She raised a son who learned to keep the peace at the cost of everything else. That's its own kind of loss. The consequences of choosing control over connection don't just land on the people around you. They shape the people you love in ways you can't take back. Will is still working through that. So is she, I think, whether she knows it or not. What I kept from that day, what I carry forward, is simpler than any lesson I could wrap up neatly. Do what you actually believe. Say the thing that's true. Hold the line not because you want to fight, but because you respect yourself enough to mean it. That's all I did. I packed a bag and got in the car. And everything that followed came from that one decision to stop waiting for someone else to make it.